one way of saying it. What I hope to do is to tell you a bit about Kanban. If you know about Kanban already, perhaps make some connections between Kanban and some other things. If you're new to Kanban, at least understand what it's all about, what all these, why we're so obsessed with our post-it notes and our whiteboards and all the rest of it, and actually get a deeper understanding of what we're trying to achieve with Kanban. Again, while we're waiting for that, my background is as a development manager. I worked in an investment bank for more than a decade. I was the global dev manager for a bond trading platform. I left that, as a lot of people did, in 2009, and I went to work in a late-stage startup in Hungary and led what, to my knowledge, is the first big Kanban implementation in that part of Europe. I've subsequently have done some work with David Anderson, who wrote the Kanban book. I worked for his company for part of last year. I'm currently working in the UK with Valtech. So a bit of everything over the last 3 or 4 years. So Kanban the Hard Way. What I've tried to do is sort of deep dive into something that looks reasonably realistic. Not a noddy example that teaches you some of the mechanics, but a real example that gives you a feeling of what it feels like to be in a team that's using Kanban. Now, for the benefit of the 3, 4, 5 people that put their hands up, who've seen this before, I've put at the bottom of the screen there, now with values. I'm not going to make a lot of reference to values, but some of you who follow me on Twitter, on my blog, will know that I wrote a post in January called Introducing Kanban Through Its Values, and another one that talked about Kanban and purpose. And that led to a little flurry within the Kanban community. I got interviewed on Spamcast, and the podcast went out in early February. And that's going to be the main subject of my talk in the main Chicago conference at the end of April, beginning of May. All I'm going to do is little flags at the bottom of some of the slides explaining, which of the values I identified, are kind of at play when I'm explaining what I'm explaining with the slide that you're looking at the time. What I'm going to do is start with this picture. How many of you have seen this picture before? That's good. That's about half of you. So this little cartoon is from the front cover of David Anderson's Kanban book. I get some mixed reactions, I think mostly positive. I actually really love the picture, and when I do a Kanban training class, we can spend quite a few minutes on this picture. You can actually put yourself in the scenario, in with the team, a team stood in front of a board. I'm stuck, I'm busy, I'm idle, let's do something about it. So in terms of values, I'm not going to make direct reference to this all through the presentation, but there's some transparency here. We can see behind the people a visualization of their work, those sticky notes, analysis, dev, test, UAT. There's some sense of flow or lack of flow. If I'm stuck, then the work that I'm working on isn't flowing. If I'm too busy, then what am I supposed to finish next? If I'm idle, then I'm not contributing to the flow of work. There's also some leadership, a small act of leadership. We don't know that this guy is formally a manager. We just know that he's put his hand up to say, we should do something about this. I think actually the other people are in a way showing leadership as well. I've worked in organizations where putting your hand up to say, I'm stuck, doesn't come easy. And to some people, even in the best of organizations, don't always put their hand up to say, I'm struggling with this, I need help, I've got a problem. In other organizations, to admit that you're not busy enough is like a cardinal sin. People worrying, particularly in the current economic environment, really do worry about, am I sufficiently, busy? Am I sufficiently important to the firm, and so on. So some bravery in putting their hands up and saying that they have these kind of problems. Very simple visualization, very simple scenario. So what I'm going to do is to dive into something that's a bit more realistic, a bit more like the boards I've used with teams that I've led or worked with and helped and advised. And also lean on some of my experience prior to using Kanban, when I was a dev manager of a large global team. So what do we see? Lots of post-it notes, lots of sticky notes, lots of colors. There's a grid. What's that all about? But what we're doing is making work visible. Each of those, nearly all of those sticky notes represent a piece of work that at some point is going to be delivered to a customer. Or released into an environment, delivered to a customer, useful to somebody. These aren't tasks. So a myth to bust right from the beginning that Kanban isn't just to-do lists on steroids, which is how it's sometimes portrayed. So these work items, they might represent something like a feature. They might represent a document that needs to be written. They might represent a person that needs to be hired if the process is a hiring process. Lots of processes not necessarily to do with software development, but where the outcome is something that somebody else needs. Variety. A little scenario here. Imagine I'm back 3-4 years. I'm dev manager of a trading system, and the trading system falls over because it's run out of disk space. Perhaps $1 million an hour lost for something as stupid as out of disk space. First thing, we need to address that issue. It's costing us a lot of money. We might, on the right-hand side, top right, board report. I might have to, a couple of weeks after the incident, make an account of myself to a management board. How is it that we managed to run out of disk space and a system that costs us that amount of money when we're out of the market? The disk space one, fixing the disk space issue is an urgent issue. We need to deal with it right away. It's costing us money. The writing of the board thing isn't maybe not the top of my list in that moment, but it has career impact if I'm not ready to deliver that on the day that it's asked for. So different kind of urgency going on there. Disk monitoring on the bottom left. A project to monitor our disk usage, how much space we have, how quickly we're using it up, and so on, as a way of preempting the kind of problem that we've had, improving our capability in that way. Is that a time-critical thing? Probably not. Is it an important thing? Definitely. And the last one, we've identified, either through ad hoc means or through whatever monitoring we have in place already, that we have a drive that will need upgrading sometime in the next few weeks. Again, a different kind of urgency. The longer we leave it, the worse the problem is going to get. So it's going to get increasingly urgent. This is what normal life is like. We try sometimes to organise our work in such a way and say, oh, every piece of work must have a date. Or every piece of work must be something really small that we can pull off a backlog. That's actually a little bit unrealistic. And a lot of waste, actually, a lot of pain even, is generated by over-organising, being naive about the variety of work. Let's make that visible, and let's make sure that our systems are resilient enough, robust enough to deal with that variety. Work items organised by need. There's a left to right progression going on here. You probably recognise on the top a pretty standard kind of workflow. We've got work that we're committed to delivering, some development work to be done, some testing to be done, and then it gets released to a customer. There's some little nuances going on within some of those columns, but that's at our high level, our workflow. And a way of describing that is saying the work in that column they all have the same need. The pieces in the dev column all need development, for example. And there's an example. So what do these need? They're in the committed column before development. Anyone? Ready for development. They need to be ready for development. That's a good answer. Another answer? They need a developer with the capability of doing the kind of work that's being asked for. What does this one need? And this is slightly more subtle. It's in the testing column. It has a red flag on it. Right, someone other than Patrick. It needs unblocking. It needs rework so that testing can continue. And I use those words very carefully. There's a habit that people have, whether they're using Kanban or not, of saying, well, when we find a problem in test, let's throw it back to dev. I think this gives a clearer picture of what really is going on than moving it back to dev. Now, different teams do different things. That's how I prefer to do it. Different teams prefer to do it another way and may have as strong a justification as I do for this way of doing it, but I like this way. And if you don't care, do it this way, it works. So work items organised by need and this left to right progression. We have a technical name for this. It's called the knowledge discovery process. Those are rather fancy words, but what it's saying is as the work moves through the system, we know a lot more about it the further through the system we are. When the work is committed, we don't know that we have the capacity and capability to do it. We might not even be that sure what it is the customer actually wants. We may have no more than the words on the sticky note telling us what needs to be built. When we get into dev, at least we know we found a developer to do it, and over time, will refine his understanding of the problem. When it gets to the end of dev, the developer at least believes that he has been capable of delivering it. Testing is the proof of that. You can build something, and bitter experience tells me this, you can build something and test something and still not be able to release it. Whether that's for technical reasons or business reasons. You've built something and for timing reasons, the customer's not comfortable, whatever, the thing doesn't get released. And you can release it as the two here on the left of the release column, and it still not be used by the customer. The customer not validate that it was actually useful, validated that it was useful to them. IT support teams not comfortable that the thing that's been released is actually supportable, so on and so on and so on. So we can take that even a stage further and say, the work's not done until we've validated that all those things have been satisfied. And in my experience, adding that validation step at the end has had a massive improvement on our process. Improved the quality of what we deliver. Developers working on stuff where they know it's going to end in a conversation with the customer, and that concentrates their minds. And the customer starts asking for better things because they know they're not going to get away with asking for stupid things, and then they're not going to be able to avoid an embarrassing conversation some way down the line. Oh, I asked for that, but I actually don't need it. I've seen that, and we remove that behaviour. Some secondary organisations. So we've seen the vertical columns, the horizontal swim lanes, typically used for sub-projects, epics, whatever you want to call them, related piece of work. Here I've got Office Move. This was a real project. It's not the project anyone particularly likes to do, but it was important. It had to be done on the day. There would have been real consequences if we'd been even a day late in this particular project. And we had the mundane moving bits of kit around, bit of work to do, but also it's an opportunity to think about resilience, failover, disaster recovery, all those kind of things. An office move is a disaster waiting to happen if you're supporting a critical system. Another piece of secondary organisation where you have dependencies on other teams. If you work in a large organisation like an investment bank, you might find that supporting things like middleware, databases, those belong not within the development team, but in a separate team. There's pros and cons to that. I won't go into that now. But if you have a dependency that's external, and that external dependency is causing you a problem, it's breaking the flow of your work, then make it visible in some way. And here's one way of doing it. So what do we see? We see the work. We see the work that's actually progressing, the work that's stuck, the work that's waiting, the work that's not even got a developer yet, and so on. It's all there. It's lurking in the back of the room. It's in the corner of your eye. You get to know and love the board. You get to know instinctively from glancing at the board what state the work is in, and so on. So this, the first level of Kanban, this is visual management. So what don't we see? Another question for you. How was my team organised, looking at this board? Anybody? Anyone want to guess?
Cross-functional developers and support engineers.
I might have done. Anyone else? Well, I could use this exact board, same board, whether I had the kind of functional organisation that Pavel just described. I'll pay you afterwards. Or a team, there's XP that picks a story up, from the backlog, takes it through, understanding what the requirement is, does the development, obviously unit testing as they go along, does whatever testing, formal testing with another party might be needed before it goes to being released automatically, obviously. So the board doesn't actually tell us how the team is organised, and that's actually really important. With Kanban, we have chosen to visualise the workflow, the states that work goes through. We've not chosen to visualise how the team is organised. And in fact, when you've got the people contributing to the work standing in front of the board, they can actually choose how they respond to that. And we're getting into self-organisation. So we've chosen very carefully which constraints to apply to the system and which ones to relax and to allow then the organisation to fit the work. This is good because it's efficient. If you've got someone available to do work, they will do work. It's efficient because it's meaningful. People have some choice about what they choose next. And that makes for a better working environment. It's completely transparent. Self-organizing systems are also resilient. If the conditions suddenly change, then the people have the chance to think about how they might want to respond to it. So Kanban works with the organization as you have it now, and in a strange way, without, in a sort of invisible way, works on your organization as well. If you give it the chance to, Kanban creates the situation in which people can organize themselves around the work that needs to be done. So let's make this a bit more dynamic. Where the blue arrows are, that's just to tell your eyes where the movement's about to happen on the board. You'd struggle to see it otherwise. So first we're going to move a ticket from the testing area into the released area. Let's see if the clicker's going to work. And that feels good. We've delivered something to the customer. I like that feeling. We haven't yet checked that the customer likes it, but at least we've delivered something. Moving that piece of work from the testing column to the release column has actually freed capacity in the released area, in the testing area. You see the little number 6 next to the testing. We're allowed 6 stickies in the testing area. We have now created capacity in the testing area. More tickets can be moved across, and as long as we respect those work in progress limits, that's what these numbers are. Every time we move something, it creates a signal that there is capacity to move something else. And very quickly, a signal moves back through the board. So in just a few hops, we're now putting stuff off the backlog. And you get the sense that work is moving smoothly. Supply is matched to demand. We're only starting new pieces of work where we have the supply of effort available. People aren't overburdened because we never have more than the right amount of work in a particular area, and so on. So this is what flow feels like. In limiting the work in progress like this, we actually get work from start to finish very much quicker than we would. We leave unstarted work available to be reprioritized, resequenced as we want, and that leaves power with the customer. But the work, once it's in the system, gets from start to finish nice and quickly. And it feels better for the people working in the system because they're not expected to do 10 things at once. Very simple rules, and those are rules that we can change, are constraining this behavior. So we've got the design of the board, that knowledge discovery process that I mentioned. We've got the different kinds of stickies and how we deal with them. We have the green ones, which we'll zoom in on those. You can't read those, but those tell us what are our criteria for allowing a piece of work to move from one column to another. So our quality gate criteria, for example. So these are all different kinds of transparency. We're transparent about the work. We're transparent about the overall workflow. We're transparent about the policies that apply while we're doing the work. So the different colours I talked about. Little guide here, rightmost, topmost. We try. The rightmost means we try, given a choice, work on something that you can finish. Better to release something to start a new piece of work, for example. Topmost means, if we've taken the trouble to sequence by priority the work in a column, then choose the top one first. And then the colours tell you how to deal with the different types of work. So the standard ones, the yellow ones, those are by default. Do those if it's not obvious to do something else. The orange ones, those are the emergencies. If production is broken, then it's our first priority to get the production system back up and running again. The fixed date ones, we try and treat those in exactly the same way as the yellow ones, with the caveat that we start them early enough that we're confident that we're going to finish them on time, and that we will bump them up in priority if the delivery date is at risk. And the blue ones, these are our intangibles, our improvements to our capability, working on process, working on the platform, general improvements to our environment, training people, whatever it is we need to do to improve our capability. And in our system here, we say the rule is we have one in play. Another example of that would be Google's 20%, for example. That's 20% of developer capacity allocated to things that might or might not result in a new product for Google, or might not result in an improvement to their process, so on and so on. The great thing about expressing our policies in this way is that it's really cheap to change anything. In my team in Hungary, one of the developers said, wouldn't it be great when we deliver a piece of work from dev to testing, we've got these quality gates about, obviously your test must pass, you must be all green, there needs to have been a code review with another developer, or you've done pair coding while you were developing. Someone said, well, why don't we do a demo to the rest of the team? Now the team understands why we've got this new code in the code base. It also is a chance for the team to say, hang on a minute, you can't put that into test, it's embarrassing. Another very cheap, for the sake of a 5-minute demo, we saved ourselves some embarrassment, some waste. So new policy, one word and an exclamation mark is a pretty cheap way of instituting a new policy like that. Changing our WIP limits, our work in progress limits. In this case, I rub out one number on a whiteboard and replace it with another one. Very, very cheap again. The question then is, what change in behaviour of the system and of the people? What does it feel like to the people from that change? And that's something we would monitor over time and check that we get the result that we expected. That's called doing an experiment. So every limit, every policy is a leverage point. The cost of making these changes is tiny, but potentially the impact on the way the process works and on the performance of our system is significant. So a little queuing theory, and this is kind of Little's law is the deep magic of a lot of process improvement. You can't escape Little's law, certainly not if you're actually measuring your work correctly. Your average cycle time over a long enough period equals your average work in progress divided by your average throughput. So that's all over a long time with, actually very surprisingly few conditions. But it tells you something about how you can intervene. You could improve your cycle time by addressing cycle time directly. If there's waste in your process, a lot of rework because of quality, for example, if work sits in a stage like a review stage for a long time without adding a lot of value, you can change that. Actually quite hard to get big changes, but that's an important type of change to make. Changing your throughput, you might go out with your checkbook and bring in more developers to add capacity to your team. That's first of all an expensive thing to do, but also typically when you bring people in, that actually costs you in the short term, even if it benefits you in the long run. So that's not an easy one. If you've got too much work in progress, limiting your work in progress is a really, really cheap and effective intervention to make. And Little's law tells you that it must change something else. It will either reduce your cycle time, or it will reduce your cycle time and affect your throughput in some kind of combination. So there's three quantities that are absolutely related. You can't escape the maths. And we can visualize that in a cumulative flow diagram. Can I ask how many of you have seen a cumulative flow diagram before? That's good, that's nearly everyone. So many of you will have heard of burn down charts where we've got 100% of work to be done and it burns down to 0 when it's done. We can draw that the other way with a burn up chart. Start with we've done nothing, we've gone up to 100%. A cumulative flow diagram is really a burn up chart for every stage in the process. And it's called cumulative because all you have to do is to count the amount of work that you've delivered over time, keep track of how many features have we delivered since the beginning of last year, and your system will probably tell you that. And then how much work is in each stage of the process now. Those are the only two pieces of information that you need. Keep track of those on a daily or a weekly basis and draw a chart. That's a cumulative flow diagram. And the horizontal width of those bands is your cycle time on average, roughly. Not going to get too much detail, and the height is your work in progress. So you can actually visualize Little's law. This is the story of a real project, a project that whose scope suddenly grew, a project that didn't actually know what testing meant. A lot of work in a testing phase without actually knowing what that actually meant and how we would finish it. Then got into a stage where a lot of code was ready to be released, but we didn't have the buy-in from the customer actually to release it. And we released a fair amount of stuff that actually wasn't used for quite a long time. So this really does tell the story of that project. It's actually a project, though, that I'm very proud to have been associated with. Despite all that pain that we went through in those early months, you can see here things actually beginning to flow. And if we extended up to the right, we'd actually see that performance would continue to improve, even though we were now supporting a live system and we were looking at building other systems beside this one. So I love the fact that we can use the CFD to tell the story of our project like that. So Kanban works with the process as you currently have it and gives you the opportunity to see how you might go about changing it as well. And we can relate that to some real deep theory from queuing theory and so on that will give us some idea of how the system will respond when we make changes. So the last is a bit about actually introducing Kanban, the effect that Kanban has on the wider system, things that you might want to keep in mind when doing it and so on. And I start with the don't panic quote. The work will teach you how to do it. It's an Estonian proverb. I'm kicking myself because I read it on Twitter and I've not been able to find who actually said it in the first place. It was so long ago. Twitter search is pretty rubbish. Google doesn't seem to be able to find it for me. You'll have to take my word for it that as much trust as I have, that is a real Estonian proverb. I can't give you. Right. So how we wish change worked. We have this idea. Our capabilities here. We think that if we change our process, undergo this transformation, that we will get to there and our capability will be there. And it'll be a nice, smooth, easy ride. Actually a lot of agile transitions are pitched in that sort of way. Actually pitched quite unagilely, one might say. The reality is a bit different. You make any kind of change, any significant kind of change that affects people, and you tend to see actually a decline in performance before, hopefully, the penny drops, the pieces fall into place, people work out what it all means, and performance and capability starts to improve, and we achieve a new normal. The time it takes to get from change introduced to penny dropping is really critical, and if that time is longer than the patience of your organisation, then that change is going to be abandoned. The expensive consultants are out the door and so on. Talking to consultants, this really happens. They price it in and so on. So it's very important if you're undergoing change. If you're doing anything, it's important to understand what to expect. And it's important if you're going to do something as important as an organisational change to understand how change works. So the J-curve. Evolutionary change, and this is the kind of change that we recommend with Kanban, is about these J-curves, but small J-curves, making changes that can afford not to work, or making changes where we can afford to take the pain for a few hours or a few days and see whether it's actually having the effect that we expected, building on that, and building on that, and not just improving the process, but actually improving our ability to make those kind of changes so that we can begin to make more ambitious changes and so on. So an increasingly effective system and an increasingly capable organisation in terms of being able to accept change. Nothing new in this. There's decades, there's a huge body of knowledge that recommends a similar approach. Going back to the days of statistical process control, Stewart and Deming, the Toyota production system, theory of constraints, Lean, Six Sigma, systems thinking. I mentioned Dave and complexity. Beyond budgeting, again, same sort of thing. Let's not. Beyond budgeting is based on planning based on where we are, not on what we think things are going to be like a year from now. Agile XP, again, about making small incremental changes, perhaps doing work iteratively. Lean Startup, again, just as I talked about having that customer validation step, Lean Startup is all about making customer validation, the actual engine of the growth of your organisation. Nothing new about this, huge body of knowledge to refer to, and you can probably relate your own experience to the pain of going through a managed transition experience, or a reorganisation that achieved nothing, all those kind of things. What a lot of these methods have in common are these cycles of improvement. They go by various names. Plan, Do, Check, Act, often known as PDCA, sometimes known as Plan, Do, Study, Act, PDSA. Check, Plan, Do, Lambda, Do, Make, Build, Measure, Learn. That's the Lean Startup one. Theory of constraints has this thing called the 5 focusing steps. That's about identifying and dealing with bottlenecks. and POOGI, the process of ongoing improvement. So rinse and repeat once you've addressed the bottleneck. So onto Kanban and the actual formal definition of the method. And it starts with what you do now. It's not about that where you want to be. It starts with where you are now and properly understanding it, properly understanding the kind of path you are setting out on, but from a platform of understanding. Agree to pursue incremental evolutionary change. So that's a personal, that's a social thing, not a technical thing. Initially respect current roles and responsibilities and job titles. We're not going in saying you're all doing it wrong. We don't need project managers anymore, for example. Actually working respectfully with the people that are going to undergo change. Understanding what they're contributing, understand how it is that your organisation has survived this long, even though you're not using Agile or not using Kanban. They must be doing something right, and let's build on that. And encourage active leadership at all levels of your organisation. And this isn't the Steve Jobs kind of leadership or the Steve Ballmer throwing chairs across the room kind of leadership. This is someone putting their hand up saying, I need some help. Or someone putting their hand up and saying, let's do something about this, we can deal with it. Core practices, visualize, limit work in progress. So you've seen a lot of visualization. You've had a brief explanation of how limit work in progress works and the effect that it has on the system. Manage flow, that actually means quite a lot of things. Managing flow of value to the customer is the way I would describe it. Managing impediments, the stuck tickets. Looking at how long things are taking, are they fast enough, what can we do to improve it? So it actually covers a wealth of things. Make policies explicit, make policies leverage points, things that you can easily change to change the behaviour of your system. Implement feedback loops. This is thinking a bit more organisationally actually. It can just be within your team, but think about how your work is reported into your organisation, how your organisation's behaviour influences the way your team works, and think about how those feedback loops could perhaps be changed, subverted even, to support the direction of change that you want to go in. And lastly, improve collaboratively, evolve, I can never say collaboratively, evolve experimentally. And there's the longer version of this says using models and the scientific method. So the scientific method is about experiments, and I've touched on that already. Using models means can mean two things. It can mean having some idea of what to expect. So you've got a mental model of how the thing works, and you're thinking before you make the change what effect it will have. The other side of using models is we're using models that other people have developed. So complexity, we're about to hear from Dave, for example, and complexity is a model that we lean on heavily. In Kanban, we lean heavily on Lean, on the Toyota production system, TPS. We lean heavily on the theory of constraints. A lot of overlap with Agile, clearly, as well. So, take advantage of those things. We're not saying all that stuff was stupid. We're not saying it's all about Kanban and nothing else. We're saying, actually, go out, learn, understand how change works in your organisation, understand how change works in organisations in general. Study your system, study what other people have found out already, and so on. I've just resequenced them here in terms of the values. I'll just touch on those again. So transparency, visualize, make process policies explicit, implement feedback loops. So transparency is obviously a really big thing. Balance is about the balance between supply and demand, managing our work in progress, that kind of thing. Also about balancing the needs of the customer versus the team versus the organisation, and in fact, improvements would generally benefit all of those, or certainly not make any of those worse. And if they do, then you're probably doing something wrong. Flow, we've talked about. Customer focus, we've talked about, and collaboration. That follows fairly obviously from improved collaboratively, evolves experimentally. But when I use collaboration, I also inferring models, scientific method, all that stuff as well. So for my talk in Chicago, so I'll be talking about the environment for change or the environment for learning. That's understanding, agreement, respect. And my catchphrase when I gave this talk previously was understanding, agreement, respect. How would you expect to succeed without those? Some people maybe seem to manage to, but I think they're probably more lucky than purposeful in what they're doing. Then it's about creating an outlook for improvement with customer focus, flow, and leadership. That's improving in a way that benefits the customer, benefits the people working in the system, and is working on our process capability and our organisational capability, our ability to deliver better, and our ability to sustain a rate of change better. And lastly, those parts of Kanban that are about driving us forward, so the transparency, the balance, and the collaboration. So put our cards on the table, make stuff visible, see what we can improve. Limit our work in progress as an early and powerful intervention, but also look at the supply and demand balance, look at the balance between operational work and improvement work, look at the balance between development work and support work, all those kind of things. Things that actually, teams actually can, with the right systems, manage as a team, have a healthy mix of work, rather than over-organising and losing a lot of value from that. So Kanban works with your system, and it encourages you to look beyond it, to look around you in your organisation, and to look to the wider world for models of how things work, how things could work, the science of it all. So this is how Kanban works. I've seen it for myself. I've done it. I've used it. I teach people now how to use it and encourage teams that are using it. Some keywords here. I'll just leave this up for a moment for you. I don't know if you can read this from the back. I'll put this up on SlideShare today, hopefully, if the Wi-Fi is good enough. And then if you want to check back on anything, ask me, check on these key phrases, and if anything doesn't make sense, you can ask me. I've referred to David's book. There's a link to it in Amazon there. You'll see David this afternoon. He's flying in from Sweden this morning. Some other resources. There's a great mail group called Kanban Dev, and if you ask a question there, I'm one of the people likely to answer it. And there's a few other people in this room that are regulars on Kanban Dev. There's a more ops-focused group called Kanban Ops, not as high traffic as Kanban Dev, but it's there. There's Kanban on Twitter. There's a good Kanban community on Twitter. There's David's website. There's Lean Kanban University, where you can find about training resources. And there's a more sort of informal gathering called the Limited Whip Society, which I don't know if Carl is going to mention that at some point, but Carl is he's not going to mention it, but he is one of the movers behind the Limited Whip Society. Was that your name? Was it you that came up with the name? Oh, he tried to stop it, okay. You like the name. Right, so with 5-minute warning has just come up, perfect timing, and that's the talk done, open to questions. I do encourage you to look at the blog, particularly the January posts, Kanban, understanding Kanban through its values, and the one that follows that, and find me on Twitter. Any questions about any of that?
What are your views on comparing it to Scrum? Scrum's popularity.
Right.
And
yeah. So comparing it with Scrum was the question. When I do a training class, at the beginning of a training class, we always ask, what are your burning issues? What are your burning questions? What questions do you want to have answered by the end of these 2 days? And you can guarantee that question will come up. I should flick back a few slides. Right, there's a clue on that slide. That's the answer to that question. Well, the answer to that question is start with what you do now. And if you're using Scrum and it's working for you, fantastic. But do these other things that we're talking about and it will make a difference. You'll see how the work is flowing. You'll find opportunities to improve it. You'll be encouraged to look at the broader environment around your team. You'll be encouraged to think about what's the customer value of the work that I'm doing, thinking about validating it, for example. Get away from definitions of done for a task and think about getting something working for the customer and getting the customer excited about it. So, I'm not saying that there aren't people doing Scrum that aren't doing all of those things, but if any of those aspects or any of the other aspects that I've said today are missing from your Scrum team, then think about laying Kanban over the top of it. So it's not Kanban versus Scrum. It's Kanban and or Kanban with something else. Someone came up with the hashtag #andban, as a good way of describing that, yeah.
Mike, you used the word cycle time.
Yes.
I was rather hoping that the community was moving away from using cycle time. Are you deliberately persisting with it?
Right. It's actually, yeah, I made a slight mistake in not caveating the word cycle time. There are, unfortunately, multiple definitions of the phrases lead time and cycle time. So we tend to use lead time to mean the time from customer or the commitment to the customer that we're going to do something, not necessarily the time that the customer requested something, but when we've made an agreement that we're going to do something to the time that the customer has received it, is happy with it. And then cycle time, the caveat, we should use from certain point in the process to another point in the process. So with the CFD picture, from here to here would be a cycle time. From here to here would be a different cycle time. With that,
So, I mean, I suppose
Yep.
the argument is that it's fairly well established in manufacturing that cycle time is the reciprocal of throughput.
yes, yes,
And if we could use stage time or process
we could,
time
yeah,
or something
yes.
like that.
It's unfortunate. There are two communities. I mean, it's not Kanban's fault that we are in this state. There are multiple communities with multiple definitions for that phrase. Some use cycle time or tack time as well. Meaning what's the rhythm of the work? How often do pieces of work, or what's the interval between pieces of work being delivered? That's not that useful a concept for certainly not at feature level. But I do take your point. I should have caveated those words, but perhaps rushing through a talk wasn't the time to do that. Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I was really interested in the things you were saying, where you were talking about the value of customer focus.
Yes.
And you were mentioning things like lean startup, where it's all about getting
Yes.
things into the hands
Yes.
of people who
Yes.
use things. I'm interested in that because although that was a kind of a founding idea of Agile's to have a closer contact, in
Yes.
a lot of places Agile's come to be this kind of just a thing that developers do.
Yes.
And they still call it that.
With a product owner.
The subject matter expert.
Yes,
You never
yes.
really see any real people who
Yes.
actually use anything.
Yeah, I do see that as a problem, and all I can say is from my own personal experience that change to our system to add that validation step had a dramatic effect on developer behaviour and customer behaviour, and improved the system to the benefit of everybody involved. I can't say more than that.
But in Scrum, if the definition is done, it's just added an extra stage, it's the equivalent, isn't
Yes,
it?
yeah, I think you get, yes. I think we start getting to hair splitting with definitions of done, and I try and get away from using that. In the end, can we validate that we've delivered something of value to the customer is the point of it all. Yes. Well, there are also broader points behind that. You could take this on forever, but yeah. I think I'm out of time, and I think time for one more question. No? Are we done then? Thank you very much. Thank you.